Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very, very honored and excited to be featuring a very special space champion, Miss Rikhi Roy. Miss Roy is a system safety engineer at Wisk Aero, an advanced air mobility company in San Francisco. Compelled by the Malaysian Airlines disappearance in 2014, she has been in the pursuit of learning how to make flying things safer. She received her bachelor's and master's degree in aerospace engineering at the Georgia Tech Institute of Technology. Furthermore, she is an international student from Singapore, a Brooke Owens Fellow, Aviation Week 2020's Laureate, the founding woman of Aeronautics and Astronautics DEI chair under AIAA, and founder of Singapore's first Women Leaders in Aerospace conference. Miss Roy advocates for the next generation of STEM leaders by sharing her personal development and leadership learnings on social media and through her podcast, the Leadership Equity and Wellness Pod. She is also passionate about leading journaling workshops for STEM students, and constantly on social media, I see her posting really inspiring messages that can really inspire the next generation of students to believe in themselves and to pursue very interdisciplinary aerospace careers. So, as you can see, Miss Roy is an incredible space champion, and I'm so excited to dive into her journey and learn how she found her own passion in aerospace. So, welcome, Miss Roy. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, to just go and kick off our conversation, could you start off by sharing a little bit more about your typical day? I know usually there is never a typical day, but how does your day kind of generally run?
Yeah, so since starting work last July, I've had to really think about how I've wanted to prioritize the things that are important to me outside of work and let that fuel the things that I care about at work. So I usually start my day at 6 a.m. and from 6 to 8, I do my morning routine and I also do something creative. So this can look like creating content. That's when I work on the podcast, or I do things that I used to enjoy doing when I was younger. So this might look like pulling out the watercolors or the oil paint. And I start my day at 8, and from 8 to 8:30 usually that's when I'll go through my emails to make sure I haven't missed anything, and I'll also skim through my work agenda for the day. So usually the day before I'll have planned out what the next day looks like on Notion and have questions for the meetings that I'll be in, or I'll have the responses written out for my stand-up meetings. So I usually take breaks every 2 hours and I'll either do a little stretch. I'm usually on my walking pad or walking treadmill that I feel really privileged to use while working. And I'll take breaks, have lunch. I'll read on my iPad or I'll watch a show and then I'll get back to work. And I finish at about 6 p.m. And that's when I will usually connect with someone within my community in the city I'm living in. So I moved to San Francisco, but I'm currently working remotely out of Washington, D.C. And so I'll reach out to someone in the community. And depending on the day, I'll try to do a movement related activity with the friend. So it will look like some sort of fitness class or walking and doing an activity. But on a day where I'm not doing a movement-based activity with a friend, I'll usually have the workout somewhere in the middle of the day at around 2 p.m. and I'll work around it. And the flexibility of my job and the policies post-COVID have allowed me to do that. And I'll usually be in bed at around 9:30 and I'll read and go to bed. And I'll usually have a night routine that I'm happy to elaborate on as well. So that sort of helps me honor the things that are important to me during the day and sandwich my day with those things that are important around work.
Wow, that's incredible. I think that's one of the most incredible routines I've heard just because I can see the balance, and I'm sure COVID had a big part in you kind of finding yourself and adjusting your schedule that makes the best use of your time. So I think starting up early in the morning, doing something very calming and relaxing, making sure in between work you're making time for the movement, connecting with friends. And it's so funny that you mentioned that you're right now based in Washington, D.C. That's where I used to live before I came to college. So we definitely have to meet once in person when I'm back in DC. But that's incredible. And, on top of all of this that you do to not only take care of yourself and the work that you're doing remotely for a company in San Francisco, you are very, very engaged in outreach and community service. I've seen, like on LinkedIn especially, that you've done so much with outreach and inspiring a lot of young students and girls around the world. Can you share more about how are you getting the inspiration? Like, what is your inspiration and motivation behind all of these outreach events you're doing? And maybe could you share some of the initiatives you're a part of for those who may not know?
Absolutely. So I think it stems from the fact that I grew up in Southeast Asia and I had a very privileged upbringing, being raised in Malaysia and Thailand as a Singaporean with Indian ethnicity. And there are a lot of different socioeconomic backgrounds that I engaged with growing up. And that privilege was very apparent to me. And service was a component that was part of each of those schools and was really encouraged from a very young age. So in high school, I had the opportunity of starting work with an NGO in Kolkata, India, that supported blind women and girls. And the way that I was able to contribute to their mission was by leading dance showcases in high school and using my strengths and passion for Indian dance and sharing that with the community to raise funds. And so I've always been the person who is working on something outside of school to contribute to a part of the community. And something that I learned from that time was that it just has to be one thing, but if you stick with it and continue donating or volunteering or contributing, it can really go a long way. And so you don't have to spread yourself thin with all the things that you need to contribute to in any ways you feel, but it can really be just that one thing. And so when I joined university, the choices I made to be at Georgia Tech was really propelled by the fact that there was a dance team there. And a lot of the messaging of their dance pieces through Bharatanatyam was for social issues eventually. So we raised money for Atlanta's human trafficking challenges and donated to a women's shelter there. And so I was able to essentially feel aligned with who I was in high school through that initiative outside of aerospace. But in juggling who I was in dance and the challenges of being a foreign national in a very demanding degree meant that I had to stop dancing after I led the team. And when I shifted my focus just to aerospace and I received the Brooke Owens Fellowship, I realized again that it could have been anyone else from Southeast Asia. I feel very privileged to have received it and to be able to have told them my story, but it was such a competitive application, just like in any competitive school, any applicant is just as brilliant as the other applicant, and it's just the draw. And I wanted to make sure that I was able to connect the people back home with these resources because I was never a space person, because I never thought it could be me, and there was no avenue to that based on the countries I grew up in and my identity. And so in connecting the Brooke Owens executive mentors and the incredible women leaders I met, I was able to continue that story of service. And then as the pandemic ramped up and I began to embrace wellness practices, to rethink how I was thinking of my story and the fact that I was able to continue on to graduate school despite not the typical GPA or not the typical application package by virtue of being a COVID graduate, I started to share the story of wellness and realized that there were so many mental health challenges that stemmed from the fact that wellness and STEM couldn't be said in the same sentence in the environments that I was in. And at best, it would just be ignored, but at worst, it would be ridiculed. And normal, vetted research that backs sleep and that backs meditation or journaling or practices of that sort were scoffed at by the folks who are now otherwise building future space transportation vehicles. And so you cannot be tired and sleep deprived when you're sending people to space. And you cannot be tired or sleep deprived when you are working on safety critical systems. So I think just finding the alignment there has been so important for me. And it's been really challenging because it's a cultural shift that needs to be made. And so from my corner of the internet, I am trying my best to encourage the next generation of people who have access to TikTok and Instagram and YouTube to really embrace the idea that you can do both and that it can really facilitate your success, and that thinking that it is not cool to meditate or sleep can really burn you out. And so those are the initiatives I've led since high school, and I'm happy to unpack any of them further.
Yeah, no, I think that was such an incredible, I think, outline of what you are a part of and what it means to you. And some of the things that you mentioned, I also was able to really deeply connect with because I'm also from a South Asian background. And when you were mentioning a lot about how you couldn't see yourself in the space industry, I really connected with that. And I'm sure a lot of girls, a lot of students from different backgrounds can relate with this. Space has historically been very it's been very consistent and same. There hasn't been a lot of diversity. Now it's changing, but historically it hasn't. And so when you see people who look very different from you, or you see these opportunities that only exist for a certain group or a certain population, it seems that you don't fit in, or it's not even an option you consider, to be quite honest. You just don't think it's like a path for you. And so the fact that you are using the platform you're given, the connections you're given through the Brooke Owens Fellowship and a lot of other initiatives you're a part of, and transferring that and paying that forward to a lot of other girls in your similar communities, or really just any community who lacks that representation, I think is incredible. And I'm positive you definitely inspired a lot of girls, a lot of students out there to look at themselves and to imagine the future in the space sector, because space is honestly the future, and everyone needs to be in it. So I'm really glad that you're making that happen through all of these different, whether it be with your interest in dance, the outreach you're doing, the mentorship, the podcast. There are so many different facets you're touching, and I think that's so, so inspiring. So really thank you for all that you have done and are continuously doing. And one of the things that I noticed when you were talking, is you were mentioning you're an international student. You're from Singapore, slash Thailand, which, by the way, it's like my dream to go to Thailand one day. It's a very beautiful place. But you mentioned that you were an immigrant and how that posed its own set of challenges. And a lot of times when I talk with students, they reach out to me on LinkedIn like, hey, I'm a student from India, or I'm a student from an international country, and we don't have a space agency, or we don't have internship opportunities like students in America do. What can I do to be involved in the space sector? I get that question all the time. And I'm like, I fortunately, in some capacity, very privileged. I was raised here, I have access to all of these space internships that I took for granted. Not everyone has access to them. So, as an international student, how did you navigate really getting your foot in the door in the space industry, which is very federally connected? And how did you navigate the job arena, the career arena in aerospace sector, especially in the US market and not, from Singapore or Thailand?
Yeah, so I think something that is really interesting about the way school rankings work is that a lot of the funding that comes in from certain sponsors then help institutions become research institutions. And in a lot of the cases, aerospace is tied to defense. And so the opportunities that foreign nationals or international students see in these highly ranked institutions are opportunities tied to and linked to defense. So those are the organizations that are coming to the career fairs. They are the ones who are encouraging the mentorship of students. They have the resources and funds to have these really large booths at NESB, SHEP, and SWE. And so navigating the space has been a skill in looking beyond that and knowing that I evidently want to make sure I want to play a role in the safety of flying things enough that I want to navigate the challenges of being here. So I think primarily it's a commitment to my personal mission to not switch out of my major, which is a lot of what other students tend to do if they think that they are equally, if not more passionate about other things that can bring them employment with more ease. The second thing that I feel really grateful for is after joining university in 2016, the Brooke Owens Fellowship was started in 2017. And that page had both technical and non-technical opportunities. So the person who was passionate about science communication or policy was celebrated just as much as the engineer. And it provided resources and links for opportunities that were not limited to US persons or citizens. And so that is how I was able to get my foot in the door to work at Bryce Space and Technology in Washington, D.C. as a space analyst. However, that was not what I set out to do. I set out to work as a system safety engineer or contribute to safety. And so in not having a resume that was aligned to this niche, that took me a few steps away. So even though I had a foot in the door of the space industry, I had to then come to terms with what I really wanted to understand and figure out how I would get into this niche. The third thing is that the niches in aerospace are not always clearly outlined. And so students need to go to websites like spacetalent.com or eVTOLcareers.com to see what job postings there are to get the skills they need for the job posting. Because when there's a gap between your resume and what's being taught in class and what the job posting requires, it is your responsibility to contact the people on those teams to understand how you can fill that gap. And unfortunately, it is not your professor's responsibility. It is not the school curriculum's responsibility. And that was something that I learned the hard way. But I learned by virtue of the fact that safety was not one of the core disciplines taught, and it would not be taught. It was an options course. And it wasn't the safety that I would do in industry. It was accident investigation that is also limited to US persons. So I had to develop this awareness of what my niche was, but also know and understand the language of the job posting, because when I was a Brooke Owens Fellow in 2019 and I had access to any and all executives in the industry, I still could not articulate my interest to match the title because I didn't know it existed, because I hadn't gone, well, to give myself grace, spacetalent.com was just being created, but and eVTOLcareers.com didn't exist, but I didn't know where I was headed. I didn't know what I was working towards. And my professors and research engineers and folks who then were key people in my journey later on, maybe they hadn't graduated yet, they hadn't become research engineers yet, or things didn't exist. And so it's knowing that there's this niche that you have to really set yourself apart in, and then get as much experience as you can in that area as possible, but to bridge the gap by talking to people who work in those organizations. And so to make this easier for students, I post where they can work at, because that was one of my biggest challenges. I had thought that it would have been demystified by 2016, but unfortunately it was up to me and my school to help others, which was really challenging. And so I was the one to really drive the initiatives to reach out to people who are foreign nationals in industry and ask them questions and bring them in and have these talks. But ultimately, there's a difference in system safety for a satellite versus system safety for a human-rated system. And I had to find a place where I could interact with a system that would then interact with humans. And so the eVTOL industry and my experience in graduate school really helped me. This is all to say that my email is in all of my public facing platforms. And when people reach out to me, I send them all of these resources and I post about them, and they're documented, and I'm trying to find a home for them on my website so that it can exist as just an FAQ section. But these resources exist, and I think it's really up to each and every person to then realize how they can present themselves as being remarkable in that niche, because that is essentially what it takes to then go through the different immigration processes in a foreign country over someone who is from that country. And this isn't unique to the United States, it's in any country. So yeah, I just wish people the best of luck on this journey. And when I started, I didn't know if it was possible, but I hope that in sharing my story, people do know that it's possible, but that they need to find their own niche, and that safety was mine, and that I hope they can find the area that they deeply care about.
Yeah, you mentioned some really incredible points that I think are really worth highlighting again, from the fact that you were saying that even though you were an international student, you didn't let that stop you from pursuing an aerospace career. And more particularly, you put yourself in those uncomfortable situations where you can be like, hey, oh, there's this company and I really like that job. Let me see what the requirements are. Let me fill my resume gaps. And one of the things, even when I was applying, to different internships and programs, I'm interested in space medicine, and that's still not a very popular career choice. I think aerospace is still, especially internships, are very heavily focused on engineering, and robotics, AI, computer science, but not medicine, not biology. They expect you to be a med student. And as an undergraduate, it's so hard for me to get involved in space medicine research at real companies like SpaceX or Blue Origin. And that's always posed a challenge for me. And what you were mentioning and how to overcome those obstacles is try finding those careers you're interested in, try reaching out to the people who are doing what you love, see what opportunities do exist, try to fill those gaps of knowledge so that you can become qualified. And of course, space is very defense focused, as you mentioned. So, of course, not all the time is it possible for you to check every single box just because of where you were born. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other opportunities for you that don't fit your interests. So definitely trying to figure out what your interest is, being very clear about it, trying to find people who are doing what you want to do and reach out to them. I reached out to you on LinkedIn and you responded to me. And there are a lot of other people who are so willing with their time and so gracious with their time to respond back to a LinkedIn message. So, take that shot. Take those risks. And I think your story is honestly a testament that anything is possible if you're persistent and you just believe in yourself. So I think that's definitely something that I will take away and I'm sure every student who's listening will, in their own way, take it from apply it to their own life. So that's great. And what you were mentioning, how you never saw yourself in an aerospace career growing up, but you had this moment in time that was like, this is something I want to work on. This is a problem I see, and this is a problem I want to address that got you to an aerospace major. So I'm curious, what was the aha moment? Can you kind of share what was the aha moment that inspired you to pursue a career in aerospace?
Yeah, so it was definitely the Malaysian Airlines disappearance. And that happened on March 8th, 2014. And I researched a lot about it and realized that people in my surroundings weren't as impacted by it as I seemed to be. And December of that year, I was traveling from Kolkata, India to Singapore when in the airport I had noticed a book on the disappearance. So I think that was probably the aha where
Yeah.
I realized that there was material out there that was beyond what I was Googling. And the book had the names and ages of all the passengers on that flight. And so I have that book on my desk while I work from home, and that helps me remember why I do what I'm doing. And to sort of take that further, in the summer of 2015, I did an internship as a high schooler on aerospace safety. So I was working as a non-destructive testing intern, and that really helped consolidate my interest in this and to know that this was an environment that I did, in fact, want to be in, and I did want to pursue this. And so the experience of that internship outweighed the experience that I had previously interning or shadowing in supply chain or finance or things of that sort. And so that's how I knew that's what I
This
wanted
is
to
for
do.
you. Yeah, I think there's always that one moment. It doesn't have to be a moment even, but for you, it definitely was where you read that book, you read that situation, you saw it in, you saw the news, and it impacted you. And I think there are moments like that that just drive you to achieve what you want. And I think you going after it, regardless of the challenges, is just incredible. And so, in this journey, did you have obstacles? And if so, how were you able to overcome these obstacles?
Yeah, so I think that when I did that internship, I was really encouraged and supported by my peers and bosses and coworkers. I was about 15, about to be 16. However, when I joined university, I came in with the assumption that that energy would continue and that the professors and my peers would sort of celebrate and positively challenge one another. I soon realized that the environment that I was in certain classes and with certain people who surrounded me, began to create limiting beliefs. And those limiting beliefs were, um, at their best, easy to ignore or set aside in my mind, but at worst, has now required mental health support and therapy to really unearth and to address. So, when students who don't see themselves represented in the classes, but who are also foreign nationals and don't have the mental health support in their university, are in these spaces, and the limiting beliefs sort of stack on top of one another, there is a different type of support that's needed. I think a really good place to start is just to begin journaling by writing out the beliefs you have about a class or a research experience. Because when I started as a freshman in an aerodynamics research group, the graduate students there were unable to really support and mentor the students because they were navigating their own challenges, but the professor wasn't helpful or supportive either. And so a negative belief that crept up, or a limiting belief that crept up, was I'm not supposed to be here, or I don't know what I'm doing. But that is a very normal thought for a 17 or 18-year-old if they're not provided guidance in a highly technical subject area. And so to have the ability to write that down or to speak that out loud or to have a safe space in your university where you can go to ask for help is really important. So the second year, freshman year, I soon found the Academic Coaching Center, which was led by these highly trained coaches, free of cost, who helped with time management and sort of reworking those beliefs. That experience really helped to challenge the things that had crept up, because as a student, you'll hear things like, oh, of course, I'm going to get an A in this class, or who gets less than a 4.0, or offhand comments that can really add up. And so when you're getting your grades at the end of that semester and you have the B's and the C's, and what you see on that piece of paper is so different from that offhand comment you heard, that creates another limiting belief. And so it's just constant in all of these spaces that you're in, and you have to be incredibly intentional to find your North Star and to have the beliefs that you do want to hold on to, because that then helps you get through. And I've seen folks who have the limiting beliefs then switch out of the major or be a part of the leaky pipeline and leave the industry. So those were essentially the obstacles, but that was the impact of those obstacles on my mental health that I've then been able to find the resources to work through.
Yeah, and I think just finding those solutions for every individual person, whether it be journaling or, talking with someone about it, or surrounding yourself with people who might be in a similar situation, can be very uplifting. As you mentioned, as a student, it's so easy to be caught up with all of these false, statements of everyone who's an aerospace is a physics genius, math genius, got to get all A's, 4.5 GPA, and it's so easy to get caught up with all of those numbers and those false pretentious statements. And I think it's so important to remember that you're only looking at 1% of the picture. Not everyone's going to tell you all the struggles they're having. On your LinkedIn profile, you don't see when people failed, you only see their success stories. So you don't know the whole story. And it's always important for you to reflect on your own journey, see how far you've come, and find those resources to keep you going and to keep you pushing. So I think that's definitely an inspiring story. And I think something a lot of students can relate with as well. And so now that we're able to learn a little bit about your work as well as the journey you've been through, I have my final question for you, which is, what final piece of advice do you have for students regarding the pursuit of a passion in the aerospace sector, STEM industry, really just any field, a piece of advice you wish you knew when you were younger? So, for example, if you could go back in time and tell 16-year-old Rikhi a piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, so my advice that I would give 16-year-old me is very much the advice that I'm giving 24-year-old me, which is that don't let the uncertainty of what the outcome is take you out of playing the game itself and showing up step by step by step. because at every point, you just need to think of and do the next right thing that comes from your inner voice and not the outside noises. But you have to take that action and not be intimidated by both the uncertainty and also the magnitude of your own ambition, because the uncertainty is the fun part, and none of us are ever going to know how it really pans out. But you have to show up every day and not self sabotage your way out of taking the next right step.
Yeah, I think that was perfectly said. And I think, that's advice that really touches home because it's so easy to be like, oh, this internship is really competitive. This fellowship with the Brooke Owens is one of the most competitive programs. Like, I'm not qualified to apply. It's so easy to pull yourself down or to take away those opportunities from yourself, and self-sabotage, I guess. And so I think it's so important to continuously just take those risks. I love to go with the motto that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I used to play basketball growing up. And so for me, it was a big thing that if I'm scared that I'm going to miss that shot and I clearly have a place to shoot and I just don't take it, then I'm losing and 100% going to miss a shot because I'm not even trying. But if I take that shot and I try, hey, there's like a 50% chance it'll go in and a 50% chance it won't. So you got to take it in a very positive mindset. And I think your story for me has been incredibly inspiring as a South Asian girl myself pursuing the aerospace sector and a career in aerospace. It's been definitely a challenge. And I've been very fortunate to have mentors and people like yourselves who are so willing to just give advice, help me on my journey. But the beginning was never easy. And I don't think it's easy for anyone. So I really want to thank you so much for your advice and your time. Today, I had an inspiring time listening to your story and your journey, and I can't wait to see all the other things you continue to accomplish in the future. And hopefully, we get to meet in person one day. So, thank you for all your time, and I'm looking forward to our next time we meet.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.